I apologize in advance if the material presented feels a little overwhelming. There's a lot to cover, but we will share the slides. And so you don't necessarily feel like you have to remember everything about the NOFO. If you need to reference something later, you'll have access to the slides and other materials as well. So I'm going to try to go through this somewhat high level, but if folks have questions along the way, feel free, as Erin said, to put them in the chat. I also have breaks throughout as I go through the sections. And so if you have a question that pops up, we'll try to get you an answer. All right, again, my name is Christy Rubenstein. I work at Diana T. Myers and Associates. DMA is a consulting firm. We do a lot of work with CoCs throughout primarily the Eastern Seaboard, but some in other parts of the country, around sort of preparing your CoC for the CoC competition each year and support around actually completing the competition process, the application. All right, so what topics I'm going to cover today includes just some general info on the 2020-2023 Continuum of Care NOFO. NOFO stands for Notice of Funding Opportunity. I'll talk through the policy priorities that HUD has outlined within the CoC NOFO this year. I'll talk about the scoring of the CoC application, funding and tiering information, and then I'll touch on new projects and renewal projects, sort of really what the NOFO says you can and can't do or what you need to look out for. All right, so let's talk about some just general information for background for those who are less familiar. The CoC consolidated application actually has a few different parts to it. The one part is what's called the CoC application. That's completed by the collaborative applicant. In that case, it's Housing Alliance Delaware. This application covers a wide range of CoC activities, but it's really at the system level and really talks about the CoC as a sort of entity, right? The work that the CoC is doing, governance structure, engagement with other partners, your overall performance, the strategic planning work that you might be doing to really advance the work to end homelessness in your community. That application is scored. And that score is really used by HUD to determine, to help determine what projects get funded. So that leads me into the project applications, which is the other part really. For many of you who are have renewal projects, or those of you who are anticipating submitting a new project application, you're going to compete for new project funds, you would have to submit a project application if you're selected, or if you're a renewal, through a system called eSNAPS. And those applications are part of the package that gets sent to HUD. That's your opportunity to say, in this project, here's what I want to accomplish. I'm going to serve X number of households. I want to provide these kinds of services. This is my program model. That's what those project applications are really about. All of those project applications go in what's called the priority listing, and that is also submitted by the collaborative applicant. So on the priority listing, all project applications, not including the planning grant, have to be ranked. That's part of the sort of local competition process, and we can talk a little bit about that. But in general, all of the projects get submitted on the priority listing. All of those materials end up going to HUD, but they have to be submitted by the collaborative applicant on behalf of the CoC. It has to be submitted by September 28th, 2023 by 8 p.m. We have basically an 86-day timeline because the NOFO was released July 5th. So we're going to be working very hard to make sure all the materials that need to be submitted are. Some other changes, I mean, good news is last year the NOFO time period was 60 days. So having 86 days seems like maybe a bit of a luxury. Another change is that the CoC's planning formula increased from 3% to 5% of what's called the final pro rata need. For your CoC, that is essentially the final pro rata need. It amounts to the annual renewal demand, which is the amount of funding it would take to renew all of your existing projects. Going from 3% to 5% is a pretty healthy boost. And that, I will say, was enabled by, I think, a lot of advocacy done to Congress very directly to say CoCs need more help for planning. And so that's how that happened. Because the rules, the HUD CoC interim rule says 3% is what is allowed. So we're up to 5%, so that's great. There are a couple new eligible continuum of care activities within project applications, and that includes VAWA costs and rural costs budget line items. Okay, so I'm just going to touch base on these. We're still learning about them, to be perfectly honest. The VAWA costs are really related to facilitating and coordinating activities to ensure compliance with the emergency transfer plan requirement. If you're not familiar with that, then maybe it's not really relevant to you. But the other part is monitoring compliance with VAWA confidentiality requirements. This probably is not a budget line item that most applicants need to make use of. If you're working a lot with DV survivors, it might make sense for you to use this. Rural cost, that's probably not going to apply to your CoC based on the definition of rural, which seems to be the same one that was used last year and what was called the special NOFO. But basically, this would help fund activities that address barriers to transitioning families in rural areas that CoCs faced when serving people experiencing homelessness. So we're still waiting for HUD to release the list of communities that are considered rural. Other changes in the NOFO include HUD's really trying to adopt the VAWA 2022 definition of homelessness. So CoCs can use that expanded definition, but the CoC has to basically work that into your written standards before you're going to be able to do that. But HUD's intent is for CoCs to be able to move forward on using that expanded definition if they want to. Human trafficking, I'll just say this was clarified that survivors of human trafficking may qualify as homeless under category 4, which is the category used for people fleeing domestic violence and sexual assaults and that category. So the issue here is that human trafficking survivors can qualify, but if you were, say, an agency interested in submitting a DV bonus application, you cannot only address or tailor it to survivors of human trafficking. You can serve survivors of human trafficking, but it can't be dedicated just to them. In other notable changes, the CoC needs to this year submit a letter signed by a working group comprised of persons with lived experience, basically attesting to their support of the CoC's work. Additionally, on the project side, there is a new project quality threshold for PSH, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and transitional to rapid rehousing projects that relates to having a reasonable average cost per household. Don't know how HUD's going to evaluate that, but it's a new one. They put it in this year. So obviously this idea of having a reasonable cost is something that is important to them. YHDP projects, that part doesn't apply to you. So I'm going to move forward. And then rapid rehousing beds. I'm just going to give HUD a little credit that they used to only score CoCs on increasing their rapid rehousing beds using data from the housing inventory count. And now they're open to CoCs pulling data from their HMIS system. So nice that they actually heard our complaints about this, because we felt like the HIC count was pretty I don't know, it's not fully reflective of what CoCs are achieving in terms of increasing rapid rehousing in the community. Are any questions on any of the changes that I mentioned? Anything come up? All right.
We don't have anything in the chat.
All right, I'm going to quickly go through HUD's policy priorities HAD staff can also comment on which of these actually are overlap with the CoC's own policy priorities, where that makes sense. But essentially the CoC NOFO, within there's a whole section where HUD outlines, here are our policy priorities, and we want you all to pay attention to this. And so I'm going to just talk through them very briefly, some more than others. The first one is ending homelessness for all persons. This one has been a policy priority forever within the NOFO. Basically, this is about engaging folks, identifying folks, making sure you are identifying those with the highest needs and the longest length of time homeless, and that you're creating the services and housing and healthcare opportunities tailored to meet their needs. Using a housing first approach. What I'll note about this is I think your CoC's done a lot of work on housing first over the last few years. Obviously, the approach calls for not having service participation requirements or preconditions to serving people, moving people into housing quickly without those kinds of conditions and barriers, engaging in sort of client-centered approaches. I will say that one new thing this year is HUD is pushing CoCs to assess and evaluate the providers in their community on how well housing first is being implemented. So just be aware that that's a push coming from HUD that really they want to see that happening outside of the regular CoC renewal competition. They just want to see CoCs pushing for implementation and fidelity to the model. Reducing unsheltered homelessness. This one really stems from, obviously, I think most of us in this space know that unsheltered homelessness has really exploded in particular parts of the country. And so HUD's really, saying that, again, reducing unsheltered homelessness is a really high priority for them. And so CoCs should be using all their available resources to move people from unsheltered spaces and into housing. Part of this is also working with local law enforcement and state and local government to eliminate and combat criminalization of homelessness. I'm not sure if this is an issue in your communities, but is definitely something that we're seeing throughout the country. There are certain groups that are really pushing for laws that would essentially criminalize homelessness. And so HUD is saying within the NOFO that they expect CoCs to be doing work to combat that. Improving system performance. This is really around, again, looking at your system performance measures. HUD has a series of them relating to average length of time homeless, or rates of return to homelessness, or exits to permanent housing. So they really want to see that CoCs are looking at that, and that you're using that information to better serve people experiencing homelessness, really figuring out what strategies work in your community. They also want you to use the coordinated entry process to promote participant choice and really move people into housing in a fair and sort of inclusive, transparent way. Again, they're really pushing for a review of all projects operating within the CoC to be evaluated on their effectiveness, including cost effectiveness, and for the CoC itself to implement continuous quality improvement efforts. Partnering with housing, health, and service agencies. This is really about engaging with the full spectrum of other systems and services in your community, from healthcare to other housing organizations to workforce development. Also, there's a renewed push within HUD, or not really renewed, new push within HUD over the last few years to engage with tribal organizations and tribal entities, if that is something that applies to your CoC. Racial equity, really the point here, obviously, there's been a lot of work on HUD's side, and they've been pushing out a lot of information about the need to address racial equity within the homelessness sector, given that Black, Indigenous, and other people of color are substantially overrepresented in almost every community's homeless population. So to that end, they really want to see that CoCs are working to identify and address barriers to really providing quality services across the board to all people experiencing homelessness. So they want to see really a high level approach and work moving forward, not just like studies at this point. They really want to see that you're taking steps to eliminate any barriers. Improving assistance to LGBTQ plus individuals. Again, HUD wants to see that CoCs are supporting work that addresses the needs of LGBTQ plus. That's in transgender, gender nonconforming, and non-binary individuals and families in their planning processes, ensuring privacy, respect, and safety and access, regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation in projects, and partnering with organizations with expertise in serving those populations. Persons with lived experience, the sort of, I think, mantra here is that people who know best what solutions will effectively end homelessness are those who are experiencing homelessness. HUD really wants to see people with lived experience brought to the table in a meaningful way to engage in planning and oversight, and across the board and sort of all the activities of the CoC. They also want to see that CoCs and leaders and stakeholders are prioritizing hiring people who have experienced homelessness. And so that includes, compensating people appropriately for their experience and expertise. Increasing affordable housing supply. So again, this one is about CoCs really taking a role in educating local community members and leaders about the impacts of the lack of affordable housing in your community. What's the connection between that and homelessness? And also maybe about working toward advancing steps such as zoning and land use reform, specific action items that would help increase the supply of affordable housing in your community. Right, any questions on those policy priorities, or Rachel or Erin, do you want to talk about the CoC's own priorities?
I was going to talk about mention the CoC priorities when I'm doing the new project presentation. So folks are okay to wait for that. There was a question in the chat from NEO about the relationship between the CoC and the Unite Us app that the hospital systems are using. Well, at least I know Christianacare, but I think some others are using it now as well. Is that right, NEO? So I think, I think a lot of
they're starting to use it at we just got a meeting. Bay Health is meeting in August that started. I'm sure it's going to keep trickling.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So I know I think a lot of homeless assistance providers do participate in Unite Us generally, but there isn't like a formal partnership. So we've used Unite Us so we accept referrals through Unite Us currently at centralized intake. But the easiest way to get a hold of centralized intake is just to call. So, I don't know. I think the question about, I think it'd be really cool to see how we can work to integrate those two things. Obviously, as you know, we have to, we use CMIS and the homeless assistance system. Is there a way for Unite Us and CMIS to somehow work together to improve access to services for people in the homeless system? Is a really good question that I don't have a good answer for, but thank you for bringing it up. Yeah.
All right. Sounds like something to explore. All right, I'm going to talk through the scoring of the CoC application. There are a few sort of main sections.
Hey, Christy.
Yes.
Before you do that, so just for folks, as a reminder, and I know Christy already said this, but as she's going through what we're submitting as a community, and not necessarily if you're someone who's thinking about coming in for new funding, not how your project's going to be scored locally. She's going through how HUD's looking at the performance of our continuum of care. Just wanted to make that clear again before you restart. Thanks, Christy.
Yeah, and there is a connection sometimes because within here, HUD kind of tells CoCs, well, we want you to use certain measures when you're evaluating project applications coming to you. But all of the stuff I'm going to cover in this section is what HUD is looking at the CoC level. Are you as a CoC doing this work in the kind of way that HUD is expecting and wanting to see?
I would also add for renewal projects that have been around for the last couple of years and any new projects coming in, a lot of our narratives, like we've been forming the local application for the projects, a lot of the narratives and additional information that's asked for in those is directly related to a lot of the questions that we have to answer in the consolidated application and is utilized to help us draft that. So a lot of the responses within the consolidated application actually reflect a lot of the work that the renewal projects are doing within the community.
Okay, so as you can see, there are several sort of main categories under which the different elements that the CoC is scored on are included. HUD calls them rating factors. And that includes CoC coordination and engagement. That one's worth 85 points. So it's a huge section, and I'll talk about it a little bit. But it really is what Erin was talking about when the CoC is asking sometimes for your narratives. It's really to help to be able to answer a bunch of questions in this section and also in the system performance section, which is worth 60 points. The work that the CoC does on the process of evaluating and ranking project applications really fits in this project ranking, review, and capacity section. And the CoC has a lot of control over getting those points if we do the process right and the way HUD wants us to, right? Whereas a lot of the other elements here, it's about the work that you've been doing throughout the year. And so if you kind of like didn't do the work throughout the year, it's a little tough to get those points. But the project ranking, review, and capacity section, if we run the process the right way, we can maximize these points. The other sections, system performance, I mentioned this really, I'll talk through what it relates to, but it's really about the data-driven elements of system performance. HMIS is really about having an HMIS system that operates, point in time count, did you submit one? And then I'll talk through this housing and healthcare coordination because it really ties into new projects that get submitted and whether they leverage housing and healthcare, not actually the CoC's work to coordinate with housing and healthcare on a more routine basis. That's actually covered up here in the CoC coordination and engagement section. So that can be a little confusing. This section here, performance and strategic planning, for those of you who've been around for a while, this used to be related to HUD's really focus on the 4 subpopulations outlined in the federal opening doors plan back in the day. And that was veterans and chronic and families and youth. And that stuff hasn't really gone away. It's just moved into other parts of the application questions. The total base is 200 points. And the CoC is going to do its darndest to get as many of those 200 points as possible. All right, so up to 86 points, I think that should be 85, that demonstrates for CoCs on this coordination and engagement section. Coordination with other systems of care, lots of questions about engaging with education, with healthcare providers, with PHAs, with other housing providers, with LGBTQ plus communities, with DV and VSP providers. So lots of questions related to that work. Having an inclusive and outcome-oriented process. Again, this is where there are questions about racial equity and engaging people with lived experience and really having an open process and including people from throughout the different sectors that have an interest in the work to end homelessness. They have in here has a fair and impartial project review and selection process. That's really in the next section. I don't know why they have that language in here, but they do. And then has created, maintained, and built upon a community-wide inventory of housing. So they really want to see work you're doing to expand access to housing very specifically for people trying to exit homelessness. All right, so what are the rating factors? There are a lot, right? So it's a lot of ground to cover. It's why the CoC is pushing to move work forward on all kinds of areas. You might think, why are they so like talking about this now instead of like we were just talking about this other topic? A lot of it is just because really HUD is saying to CoCs, you need to be doing all of this work. And it's a big lift, right? But I'll point out the areas worth the most points. Engagement with public housing authorities worth 10 points. Housing first worth 10 points. increasing rapid rehousing beds worth 9 points. And then some of the others we have addressing the needs of LGBTQ individuals, 7 points, promoting racial equity, 7 points, and then addressing the needs of DV survivors, 5, and involving individuals with lived experience, 5. So again, we're just seeing the wide range of areas to be covered by the CoC within this. And again, the discussion here, some of this is tables, a lot of it's narratives, and the CoC is going to try to talk about the work they're doing to advance efforts to address these different issues. Project capacity review and ranking, 27 points this year. There are points for having objective criteria as part of the evaluation process. That was reduced. It used to be 8 points last year. It was reduced to 4 this year. They did, however, boost the system performance one from 8 to 9. They also want to see, again, the CoC using system performance measure related criteria when evaluating project applications. So again, this is why you're seeing sort of very objective data-driven approaches. If you are a renewal applicant or even a new project applicant, you're going to be asked about some of these things because we need to make sure they're covered. Use of a comparable database by DV providers. Another area, rapid return to permanent housing and severity of barriers experienced by participants. Again, these are reflected in the renewal scoring criteria, and probably you'll be asked about particularly rapid return to permanent housing, right, in your new project applications. Promoting racial equity in the local CoC process. That's also important to HUD. Reallocating projects. So reallocation is a fancy term for taking money from a renewal project and putting it to a different use, a new project. Reallocation, you don't actually, HUD has a threshold they want to see, but CoCs don't necessarily have to meet that threshold. They just have to have a process to show how you would evaluate projects and determine if they should be reallocated, and really be willing to do that process and take those steps if needed. And then ranking and selection process, that's all about transparency, making sure the CoC notifies everybody within the timeframes that HUD has established to make sure you all have enough notice around and can fully participate in the process of submitting project applications. All right, on the objective criteria, the one thing I'll note here is they want to see that at least 33% of the total points that projects are evaluated on are objective criteria. That could be cost effectiveness, the type of population served. It can also have a big overlap with these, which is the system performance measure related criteria. Here we have to have at least 20% of the total points in order to get all these, to get 2 of the points. Again, they want to see, however, that you are including measures related to the system performance measures. That includes returns, and for it says first-time homeless. We don't really look at that on the project level. We do look at income growth. We do look at exits to permanent housing as well. Homeless management information system. This one's pretty straightforward. Did you submit your housing inventory count? Are your DV providers using comparable database and providing information? What's your bed coverage rate? So bed coverage rate really means the extent to which projects that are serving people experiencing homelessness in your community participate in your HMIS system. For you, that's CMIS. And then did you submit the longitudinal systems analysis report on time? Point in time count, did you submit your PIT count on time? And they want to know about like any changes to your methodology. And did you effectively count youth? So did you have a process to engage with youth to improve how youth are counted? Because it can be difficult to count youth experiencing homelessness. System performance, HUD really covers the key system performance measures. Again, we have first-time homeless, length of time homeless, successful housing placement or retention, returns to homelessness, and jobs and income growth. As you can see, HUD puts a heavy point value to length of time homeless and successful permanent housing placement and retention. So those are really important key issues for HUD. Up here, reducing the number of homeless individuals and family, that's really related to PIT data. And I'll say the rest of this is a mix of the data from your CoC's system performance measures report. and also narratives where you talk about the CoC strategies to improve on all of these measures. And this bottom one is just, did you submit the system performance measures on time? Coordination with housing and healthcare. So each of these is worth 7 points, a total of 14 points. HUD wants to see that you're leveraging housing resources and leveraging healthcare resources, but very specifically within new permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing project applications. So if the CoC submits project applications that are for permanent housing, do you have a leverage of housing resources? If you can leverage at least 25% of the units in a PSH project, or serve at least 25% of the program participants with leveraged housing resources in a rapidly housing projects, then the CoC gets to earn these points. And that's good for all of you who are applying for funds, because it increases the chance of you getting funded if you're, in that what's called tier 2 competition. Now, what does this include? I'll just say very briefly, it can't be housing units funded through CoC or ESG programs, but anything else they're pretty open to. So if you happen to have vouchers that you can tap into, if you happen to have a funder who says, here's a pot of money to do rapid rehousing with, that would be great. If you happen to know, say, a LIHTC, a low-income housing tax credit developer who has some units, and you could provide the services and they would provide the units, that would be great, right? All of those things, units supported through home or CDBG or any other source, really. On the healthcare side, it's a little tricky. They really want to see that the value of assistance being provided is at least an amount that is equivalent to 25% of the funding being requested. But we do know that many organizations have relationships with healthcare providers. And so often this is doable. You just have to quantify it and have a formal written commitment to that effect. If you're doing substance abuse treatment or recovery, it really has to be open to all program participants. So for all of these, really what HUD wants is that the healthcare provider doesn't add an extra layer of eligibility requirements on top. They do want it so that anybody being served in the program can take advantage of those healthcare resources. And I can take questions on that scoring part if anybody has any. All righty. Any comments from anyone else? Okay.
I'll mention again, probably when I talk, but with regards to the bonus points, if you're someone who's coming in for a new project or new funding, your project will be much more competitive if you're able to show that you have that you're using those other resources, whether it's the healthcare resources or the housing resources that Christy just explained. It's really important to HUD and the CoC. So just emphasizing that.
All right, funding and tiering information. I'll talk a little bit about the funding levels. So HUD has a system for the CoC program where essentially what they say is it has to be a competition. And so they set it up so that you're guaranteed to get some of your money, but not all of it. And so this year, the threshold for what is called tier 1 is 93% of the annual renewal demand. Annual renewal demand is all the funds that you have for your existing renewals. So they're basically saying, okay, you add up that amount of money that funds all those existing projects, and we'll guarantee that you get at least 93% of that back to you. So of course, that's a little disheartening because there's 7% that you're not guaranteed to get, and that's why it's a competition. So that's what tier 1 is. Tier 1 is the pot of funds that are safe and that you will get back. Tier 2 is the pot of money that essentially is up for grabs. And anything placed in tier 2 is going to have to compete in a national competition for funds. So tier 2 is the total amount of sort of basically like what's left over from tier 1. You all don't have YHDP projects, so the language there doesn't necessarily apply. It does not include the DV bonus, but it does include the CoC bonus. The CoC bonus is 7% of what's called the final pro rata need. And I apologize on behalf of HUD, I don't know why I should, but they use a lot of this jargon, but essentially your final pro rata need is that ARD amount. So 7% of that will be your CoC bonus. And then essentially you have the 7% left of your annual renewal demand, and that makes up tier 2. In addition, HUD has funding through what's called the DV bonus. The DV bonus is a special pot of money. It doesn't like supplant or replace the CoC bonus in any way. It's just this separate pot of money that Congress essentially gives to HUD each year over the last 5-6 years at this point, for projects that will specifically serve survivors of domestic violence who really are, needing homelessness assistance, right? All right, so I'll talk through the actual dollar amounts in the next slide, but to talk a little bit about tier 2. So projects placed in tier 2, again, are in a sort of like national competition. Every CoC is going to have a set of tier 2 projects. They're all going to compete with each other. HUD will score them. It's not scored on the quality of the applications themselves. What it is scored on is 50 points awarded proportionally based on the CoC's application score, which is why we're talking about the need for the CoC to get the highest score it can. Where the project ranks within the CoC's tier 2, so the higher it ranks, the more points it will accrue in this 40-point bucket. And then commitment to housing first. So if you're a housing project, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, TH to rapid rehousing, you're going to have to commit to housing first and get these 10 points. Tier 2 projects could be anything. There are no rules here like that says only tier 1 can only be renewals, or tier 2 projects has to be renewals at the top and then new. No, it's a mix. And dependent on the CoC's own policy priorities and funding policies, essentially, that say how you're going to rank projects, right? And so there's a lot of discretion for CoCs. There's also, because of this scoring here, there's also some strategy about what makes sense, what you're most likely to get based on how this score works out. So it's a mix, but that's really based on the CoC and your own local decision making. And HUD really is clarifying in the NOFO that they're using this two-tiered approach and really pushing CoCs to prioritize based on local needs and gaps. All right, how much money? Well, excitingly, the Delaware CoC will be able to apply for a little over $10 million this year. That's a combination of what's called your ARD, the annual renewal demand, the CoC bonus, the DV bonus, and your CoC planning grant. So again, the CoC planning grant increased from 3% to 5%. So that's nice to support all the work that you saw the CoC has to do. The CoC bonus, 600,000 and change this year. The DV bonus, a little more than 575,000. So you can see if you're a VSP or victim service provider or an agency able to serve survivors, that's a nice pot to potentially tap into. And then the CoC bonus, again, it's a pretty significant amount, and hopefully the CoC will be able to take full advantage of it. The tier 2 amount this year is going to be at 1.2 million. So that's large, and it's going to be maybe a little stressful to figure out which projects go in tier 2. But nonetheless, that's what the CoC has to do. Any questions about that? Okay, I'm going to move forward. We're going to talk about new projects, just some general info. New project funding. So I've already just shown you the numbers, but basically new projects can be funded through reallocation. As I mentioned before, that's when you take money from an existing renewal project, put it toward a new use. The CoC bonus, you can combine reallocation and CoC bonus dollars. And then there's the DV bonus. You can't combine those, the CoC bonus or reallocation dollars, with the DV bonus. That's a no-no. And the DV bonus is limited in terms of the project types allowed. You can't do permanent supportive housing or HMIS with the DV bonus, but you can do the other project types. That includes rapid rehousing, the joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing project type, and what's called an SSOCE, a supportive services only, for coordinated entry activities. All right, what is HUD allowing this year? What I just had on the slide, I just said those. Again, just to underscore, SSOs can only be for coordinated entry related activities. The CoC NOFO also allows for what is called an expansion. That is, if you have a renewal project and you want to expand your activities, and a transition. That is, if you have a renewal project, say it's a transitional housing project and you don't want to do transitional housing anymore, you can transition to something like permanent supportive housing. All new projects have to be reviewed by HUD to determine if they meet HUD's quality threshold requirements, and I'll show those. In terms of the DV bonus, again, we have in total across the country, 52 million available. Your amount's about $575,000. You can do rapid rehousing and joint transitional housing to rapid rehousing. You could do as many of those as you wanted. Each one has to be at least $50,000. Supportive services for coordinated entry, you can only apply for one of those under the DV bonus as a CoC. The DV bonus, they can be new standalone projects. They can be an expansion of an existing project. The existing project does not have to be dedicated to DV, but whatever's funded under the DV bonus has to serve survivors, right? It has to be dedicated to DV. Again, you can't combine reallocation or CoC bonus funds with the DV bonus. And anything that was awarded a DV bonus in a prior year, you have to keep as dedicated to serving survivors of DV, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Projects have to participate in an HMIS comparable database. HUD scores the DV bonus projects in their own sort of like little mini competition within all the other competitions, right? So each of those projects is going to be scored according to the project type that you're applying for. Here's what the elements are. So if you're a DV bonus applicant, just be aware that, again, the CoC application score matters up to 50 points for the CoC, proportional to the CoC's application score, 10 points for how the CoC collaborates with victim service providers, 10 points for the need for the project. That's really a quantitative evaluation of need. 15 points for the quality of the project applicant's experience. So that's basically you demonstrating you've served this population before, you can do a good job doing it. 8 points for demonstration of inclusion of victim-centered practices, and 7 points for how the provider will involve survivors with lived experience in the policy and program development. That's also true for SSOCE projects. That was worth 15 points. What else are they looking at for the SSOCE? Again, the CoC application score up to 50 points proportional, 10 points again for collaborating with BSPs, and then 25 points for the need for the project. New funding considerations in general, just throwing this out there. Be sure you have staff available with capacity to complete the eSNAPS application if you were selected for a new project. If you've never done this before, take a look at the instructions and make sure that you feel like you can actually complete that. Carefully review HUD's requirements for CoC grantees. You have to have the capacity to administer the grant and the CoC's requirements. Make sure you can, you are going to commit to participating in centralized intake and CMIS. If you can't, then maybe this is not the opportunity for you. Recipients can name subrecipients to help undertake project activities, but just be aware that if you do that, you are on the hook for monitoring the performance of any subrecipients. All right, project types. I'm not going to go in this in great detail. The slides will be here, but essentially permanent supportive housing is housing that's going to serve people who have a disability and Also in this CoC, there are going to be people experiencing chronic homelessness, because that's essentially what your CoC has within its written standards. So you're going to be dedicating your beds to those experiencing chronic homelessness. There's a slide about that. If you have any questions about the definition, not sure what all this means, I encourage you to reach out to the CoC staff and make sure you get clarification on that if you're just not sure what all these definitions mean. In terms of passing threshold review, these quality threshold items are really the same for PSH and rapid rehousing, but essentially HUD wants to see that the type of housing you've proposed is appropriate, including the configuration, and it will meet the needs of the households. The supportive services are appropriate, that you are ensuring a connection to mainstream benefits, that you're going to assist participants in obtaining and remaining in their permanent housing, and that your average cost per household is reasonable. In terms of rapid rehousing, again, this is short or medium-term tenant-based rental assistance with also supportive services to help move households into permanent housing quickly and hopefully maintain it. Now, rapid rehousing can serve categories 1, 2, or 4, but on category 2, I'll just note, if that's not a priority within your written standards, you're going to be really doing category 1 and 4 primarily, okay? If you're not sure what any of these mean, category 1 is literal homelessness, category 2 is at risk, category 4 is persons fleeing domestic violence, essentially. Rapid rehousing, again, the same threshold items, except from the lens of, does this make sense in a rapid rehousing program? So just be aware of that. Joint transitional housing to rapid rehousing. Now, the joint component is a little different. It combines elements of both the transitional housing model and the permanent housing rapid rehousing model. So folks can move from, say, transitional housing to rapid rehousing pretty seamlessly, but it's a little more of a complicated project, to be very honest, to set up, because you have to get the proportions right in your TH part and your rapid rehousing part. Now, you can have leasing and operating dollars to support your transitional housing part, but for the rapid rehousing part, it's only going to be rental assistance that you can ask for, and then you can also ask for, of course, supportive services, HMIS, and admin. You have to be able to provide both components. So that's really important. And participants, it's really about client choice, that participants should be able to choose if they want to move from transitional housing to rapid rehousing. Maybe they don't want to be in transitional housing at all. You kind of have to be able to accommodate that. It's most appropriate for certain circumstances where you have a large number of folks in unsheltered locations that you want to move maybe into sort of this transitional housing as a temporary solution until you get them into permanent housing. Same for DV if they need sort of like a crisis housing option while they move into a permanent housing option, and also for youth. So HUD really sees this as a way for the transitional housing to be sort of, you know, crisis housing, temporary housing, while folks get lined up to move into rapid rehousing. Just be aware that there are additional threshold requirements for this component. So again, the configuration and type of unit should be right, but what HUD wants to see is a kind of a rule of thumb is you have twice the resources in the rapid rehousing portion as the TH portion. Or you can demonstrate that the budget makes sense. You can also just say you have twice as many units as in rapid rehousing as TH, but you just need to demonstrate that if somebody wants to move from transitional housing into rapid, that you'd be able to facilitate that without an extremely long delay, okay? The other things that they've added to this one include adhering to a housing first model very specifically. And again, this average cost per household should be reasonable. Otherwise, they're essentially the same as what's in the PSH and rapid rehousing quality thresholds. All right, transition projects. A grant to fund a new project to transition an eligible renewal project being eliminated through allocation from one program component to another over a course of a 1-year period. That's a lot of words to say. You have a renewal project, you want to transition to a new use, you can use this transition option. You maintain your contract year, you maintain your budget, It has to be the exact same budget, but you can then spend the year basically winding down your old use and ramping up your new use. So it has to be the same recipient. This is not a transfer process, just to be clear. Transfer is a different thing. If you don't want to run your grant anymore and you want to transfer it to somebody else, that's done, and it is not done through this CoC competition process. That has to happen outside of the NOFO period. You have a full year now to fully transition from your original component, but at the end of that year, you have to be fully operating the new component. You have to really eliminate completely your existing project to create the new grant. So you're turning money over, okay? Transition grants in this competition are eligible for renewal in subsequent years. But again, that's up to the CoC. And the renewal applicant, you're not going to submit a renewal application. You're going to submit a new project application under the transition option. You really need the consent of the CoC to be able to do that. And then again, I stress this, by the end of the operating year, you have to be fully operating that new use. If you're going to do this and you've been approved by the CoC to do it, there's some special screens you're going to have to fill out in eSnaps, just be aware of that. And you're going to have to provide a narrative. So just be aware you're going to have to explain to HUD how you're going to transition over. Yeah, I just want to say, like, again, you're really talking about the new project only when you fill out the transition application. And again, you have to really describe how the new project is going to be run. And hopefully we'll have instructions soon. Haven't been updated yet, but we'll see. Expansion. If you have a renewal project, you want to expand your existing renewal, you can add beds, units, person served, or services. That is a process where you essentially are going to submit a new project application. You're going to submit your renewal as well. So just be aware, you're submitting the renewal, you're submitting a new, if you're selected, for expanding the units, beds, person served, or services. HUD's clear on what expansion means. You can't fund capital costs through an expansion, so just be aware of that. If you go the expansion route and you're approved by the CoC, again, you're going to submit the renewal and a new. You're going to look for screens that say, are you an expansion? And you're going to have to answer a series of questions and really let HUD know that the renewal and the new project are connected in this way. All right, eSnaps applications. Again, your CoC has an RFP out. Rachel's going to talk about all that. It's open to anybody who's eligible, whether you've gotten CoC funding in the past or you haven't, doesn't matter. You can apply. Those selected will be notified, and the CoC will provide some TA. There are those new budget line items. Only is going to make sense for a handful of folks, and the rural is probably not going to be an option for your CoC, unfortunately. The guides and instructions, I wish they were available, updated versions. They're not, but they will be, especially for your new project applicants. By the time you get around to being selected and being told to work in eSnaps, you'll see guides for various things, including new project detailed instructions, also transition grants, expansion, CV bonus. They'll have information on all of those. Again, the CoC will be available to offer TA as well. One word on match. Doesn't matter what your project is funded under, 25% match is required. I encourage everybody to just carefully read the sections of the detailed instructions when they're updated that talk about match and when you need to have an attachment and when you don't. In particular, HUD wants to see documentation related to third-party in-kind match. Why? Because they don't want you saying somebody else is going to do something that other party never agreed to provide as match. So they just want to see documentation related to that very specifically. Tips on new projects, just be aware that when you're creating an application, make sure you answer all parts of the application questions. Don't assume people have read the same, like they're connecting the dots between a narrative, 5 screens ago and something here. And then if HUD's asking for actions or strategies, be specific. Don't kind of like give them their question back to them with like a very generic statement. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go into the renewal applications, renewal projects. You have to be expiring in calendar year 2024 to be able to apply for renewal. If you expired December 31st, 2023, that would also apply. All renewals in the CoC have to be ranked. And again, HUD has these budget line items. For the rural, it's probably not going to apply. For VAWA, cost, BLI, you should probably connect with the CoC if you think this applies to you. It's going to be a relatively limited number of applicants who might make best use of the VAWA cost budget line item. So just connect with CoC staff about that. Consolidation, just noting that consolidation is an option. That's if you have 2 or more projects and you want to consolidate them into a single project, you can apply to do that. Just note that you have to have the same recipient. It has to be for the same component. So you can't say, oh, I'm going to take a TH and an RRH and consolidate them into a TH to RRH. That doesn't work. You also have to be in good standing with HUD. If you have any of these issues with your existing renewals, your consolidation would maybe be rejected. So just be aware, if you know that you have some kind of outstanding issue with HUD, don't really pursue the consolidation maybe this year. What is not allowed, as I already said, you can't combine 2 components of different types, and you can't do a transition and a consolidation in the same year. Like it's not a thing. When you do a consolidation, just be aware that each project in the consolidation has to be submitted separately, and it has to be ranked separately by the CoC. So just be aware of that. That's just how the system functions. Again, just know as well that your BLIs have to match what's on the GIW. Otherwise, it's going to cause problems with HUD. So just be aware of that if you're thinking about consolidation as well. Again, you're going to have special screens and eSnaps, and you have to submit separate renewal project applications for each of your consolidated projects. So you're going to have to pick HUD's going to tell you what's the survivor through the rules that they have set up, and that will all get checked by the CoC, but you do have to fill out those screens, and if you need help, the CoC will provide TA on that. The eSnaps applications for renewals, I'm going to suggest, because the instructions have not really been updated, I can, however, tell you that the eSnaps 101 toolkit and eSnaps 201 toolkits are both available to you now. They don't really get updated from year to year. You can use that information to help you navigate how to set up a project application. So please do that. I'm almost done.
Before we move on too far, we did have a question in the chat for expansions. So for an expansion, if a renewal project wants to expand into a different county but offer the same service, would that be considered a new project or an expansion project?
You can consider that an expansion if you're asking essentially for new resources. If you were to do that, to serve that extended community, if you were saying that you were going to take the same amount of money and then just expand your geography, that wouldn't need to be an expansion.
So I've been thinking about this since Stacy put it in the chat. Stacy, it also, I would say, depends on what you're trying to do. And I'd be happy to talk with you in more detail one-on-one about what may make the most sense for you. There can be benefits to keeping the projects separate. There can be benefits to making it an expansion and thinking of it as one project, both from an administrative, like a grants administration perspective, and also a performance perspective. So I will say, I think either are possible because HUD's the statewide CoC, the county isn't really an issue in terms of like, it can be the same project and be in a different county. Like we have scattered site PSH that's statewide, for example. So the county issue isn't an issue. It might be more just a strategic thinking process, and I'd be happy to talk with you about it.
Thank you.
In terms of renewal project guides, just be aware that you should be checking the eSnaps page on the HUD Exchange for updated instructions. For if you're a first-time renewal, just note that you're going to have to set up your application from there won't be anything there. So you're going to have to use the information from your new project application and pull it in manually yourself, copy paste. If you're a different renewal that you've been doing this for a number of years, you should be able to use the import option. Just make sure you do that. Again, special screens for consolidations and expansions and transitions. If you start a project application, you're stuck with it. You can't go back and delete them. But if you start one and you're like, oh, I messed this up, like you should probably rename it to something that says like do not use or ZZ, do not use. It'll fall to the bottom of your list. But unfortunately, they don't ever get deleted in eSnaps. Applicant profile, you have to complete this in order to be able to like do your application. And you have to hit the complete button, and you have to make sure you don't have any red X's on that submission summary page in order to click complete. So just make sure you're carefully going through the applicant profile. A lot of times people jump ahead and try to do the project application without fully completing the applicant profile. And then they're like, I don't know why it's not working. And it's usually not working because you didn't fully complete the applicant profile. There's a form called the 2880. HUD has a specific set of instructions for this form. It is not easy to do, but just fill out the form, reading the instructions carefully. And just know that grant amounts will auto-fill from the application. It does take some time sometimes for eSnaps to sync these different parts, the applicant profile and the application. So don't be too worried if it doesn't. Code of conduct, you need to have this updated. You can check the website to make sure that it is on there. If your code of conduct isn't on that list, then you should fix that. HUD will flag it. It'll be a curable deficiency, but it will be a deficiency, and they'll reach out to you and tell you to like fix that ASAP. Detailed instructions, again, should have a list of the screens that you need to review and update. Even if you're a renewal, even if you choose import, there are going to be a series of screens that you just have to update. So keep an eye out for those screens and make sure you complete them all. I'm also giving a plug to people to review your narratives, especially in parts 2 and 3B, and make sure everything there is up to date. Submit without changes will probably be there again. I haven't yet gotten into an application yet. If it is there, it was a little quirky last year. Just note that on that submit without changes screen, there's a narrative box, and anywhere where you go in and make a change to a screen, changing something that was already there, you should use that box to tell HUD the change you made. Match, again, for our renewals, 25% of the requested funds less leasing costs still required. And again, there are a lot of questions often about match documentation. HUD's language is often unclear, but just keep in mind, again, third party in kind, you're probably going to need to attach something that shows there's a commitment there. Otherwise, make sure you have on file what a letter attesting to the match commitment and whoever's making that. You can get help from HUD. This year, it's only through CoC NOFO at HUD.gov. Just be aware of that. For CoC NOFO competition-related questions, eSnaps-related questions, goes to this email address if you're asking HUD. If you have a bigger general CoC program policy question, you can still use the HUD Exchange AAQ portal, but nothing for the CoC NOFO or eSnaps should go through the AAQ portal. You will not get a timely response. So make sure you're using that email address. All right, I'm done and ready to turn it over to Erin. If there are any questions, let me know.
I do not see any additional ones in the chat, so I will go ahead and keep it moving. Okay, I do not plan to take up a lot of your guys' time, but we just want to give a quick renewal project update for those renewal projects that have already submitted applications at the local level. First, I just want to give a quick little kind of renewal process overview. The CoC has a lot of processes that happen in tandem with the local applications and then the HUD applications. So what we are working on right now is kind of moving through those processes. So just to clarify where we're at and kind of what's going on, the first thing that the renewal projects did this year was submit their renewal project applications at the local level. Currently we are at the stage of the process where the renewal project applications are undergoing review and scoring. So that's kind of happening in the background, while in tandem, the next step for renewal project application applicants is to submit their application drafts and eSnaps. And another step in the process after that will be project selection and ranking. So these are kind of the things happening in the background, and these are kind of the progression of the things that we are moving through from day to day. While the projects are submitting their draft applications, the CoC will be working on getting selection and ranking decisions out and undergoing project appeals. And after all of that's completed, projects will submit all of their final applications to be submitted with the consolidated application in eSnaps. So a little mix of the HUD process and the local process here. For our renewal projects, we currently are about to undergo the actual review and scoring by the CoC funding committee. Those meetings are set for Monday and Tuesday next week, the 31st and the 1st. And renewal project scores will be released with the project selection, reallocation, and ranking decisions. Those meetings are tentatively scheduled with the funding committee later in August, the 24th through the 29th, and then it undergoes another level of review and approval by the non-conflicted board, which will occur between August 30th and September 6th. Release of project scores, selection, reallocation, and ranking is tentatively scheduled for the week of 9/11, and that notification is what will kick off the project appeals submission period. These are tentatively scheduled because they are subject to HUD required timelines and when the meetings actually get scheduled with the committee and the board themselves. But we will be following up with official communications when those are settled and when projects need to be notified of all of the information coming out of those meetings. The next step for renewal projects is to complete their fiscal year 23 eSnaps applications. We anticipate HUD to release the detailed instructions and navigational guides for those applications sometime next week. Hopefully, fingers crossed. So based off of that, we've set the tentative deadline for renewal projects to submit the first drafts of their eSnaps applications by August 18th at 4:00 p.m. We will tentatively be offering application TA the week of the 14th through that deadline for the first draft submission. And we will notify everybody when those applications and navigational materials are available and when we confirm the deadline for the first date submission. Because again, it's based off HUD's release of those materials. And after all of those drafts are submitted, the CoC lead staff here at HAD will review the first drafts to make sure that they're complete and accurate. There's no major errors or anything like that. And if there's corrections needed, we will be reaching out to the renewal projects directly with additional instructions and timelines on things that need to be completed for those. eSnaps draft submissions are going to mirror the same process that we utilized last year. So you guys will be submitting them to Felicia and myself here at HAD. And we will be asking that you submit the PDF exports of your applications and that you don't actually hit the submit button in eSnaps when you complete your drafts. If you actually hit the submit button, it sends it to us in the system and it takes a really long time and sometimes like a day or two for the system to update for us to see it on our end. And if you need to make any corrections, then we have to send it back. And it's just a little bit more of a lengthy, time-consuming process. If you guys just export the PDFs, then it's super easy for you guys to go back in and make corrections if any of those are needed. And we'll have you submit the final submit button once all the reviews are completed and no other information needs to be changed within those applications. When you go through those applications, there will be a submission summary at the end, and we just want to make sure that you have all of those sections completed before you export that draft to us. And this is just the file name and the subject line for the email that you guys will submit those applications to us in. And you can submit all of your drafts in one single email if you have multiple projects. Just to reiterate what Christy said a couple minutes ago, while you wait, some recommendations are to locate and review your fiscal year 22 renewal project eSnaps applications. Those have a lot of the important information in them. And for any first-time renewals, you will want to locate and review your new project applications from last year. We want you to review the HUD eSnaps 101 and 201 toolkits. It has a lot of guidance and a lot of those base questions that need to be answered about utilizing the eSnaps system. And at this point in time, you can review and update your applicant profile. You don't have to have the new or renewal project applications ready to go to update your applicant profile. The information in those transfers into those applications. So this is the kind of the first step for you guys, and you can start taking care of that now. And just one last note is to familiarize yourself with the common issues encountered in eSnaps. A lot of the documentation that they offer, again, answers a lot of those base questions. And usually whenever anybody reaches out to us, this is the documentation that we reference when providing TA or answers to any of those questions. So some of that will just answer some of that stuff right off the bat for you guys, so that you don't have to wait on our availability to get started. And that was it. That was all I had. Very quick and easy, so we can move on to the new project RFP. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they'd like to know about the eSnaps drafts for renewal projects? Okay. These slides will be available on our webpage later along with Christy's slides. So they will be referenced, and we'll be sending out further notifications to you guys when those timelines are finalized and when the documentation is available. And I will hand it over to Rachel.
All right, everyone. New continuum of care funding. I'm really excited to see a lot of folks here from organizations that don't currently receive continuum of care funding. So thanks for being here. I know that the CoC funding process, as it is a federal process, is a lot, sounds like a lot, especially the last little more than an hour that you've been hearing about it. Hopefully, my goal is to provide you with the information you need to be able to apply for new CoC funding successfully. And especially for those of you who have never done it before. So a little bit of what I'm going to say might be a little repetitive to some things that Christy shared, but hopefully that's a good thing for folks that are here to learn how to apply for funding for the first time. All right, so the RFP was released about 3 weeks ago, July 7th, and the applications are due Wednesday, August 9th at 4 p.m. Applications are to be submitted via email to the email addresses here, myself and Aaron. As Christy already shared, there's a good bit of new funds being made available for our continuum of care to apply to HUD 4. And it is always possible that some funds will be made available to new projects through reallocation if locally funded renewal projects are determined to be no longer needed in the community or poor performing, et cetera, through the performance review process. So when you're thinking about applying for funds, you have a good amount of funds to work with in your application, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. DV bonus funds must be used to serve individuals who meet category 4 or families in category 4 of the HUD homeless definition. So people fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking. human trafficking, including sex trafficking. However, these projects cannot exclusively serve people who are fleeing or attempting to flee human trafficking. Must be open to everyone fleeing domestic violence and those other situations as well. And renewal applicants may apply for new funding through expansion and transition grants. Those have already been talked about, but that's where if you're a renewal applicant, this is how you apply for expansion funding or transition funding, excuse me, is through the new project application. Even though it's not a new project, it's new funds. This is the process that you'll use to apply. Christy already went into detail about these project types. This is my 101, just as a reminder, especially for new folks. So permanent supportive housing, housing and services, permanent rental subsidy for people and families with disabilities who are experiencing chronic homelessness. Rapid rehousing is helping people and families experiencing homelessness in Delaware access housing in the community, rental housing, providing temporary rental assistance and services so that they maintain housing and don't return to homelessness in the community. And joint transitional rapid is both the temporary housing component or interim housing component, right? That transitional component, plus the dollars to help people move out of that temporary living situation into housing in the community with the support services they need to maintain housing. The Delaware CoC identified priorities this year. And when the funding committee meets to review new project applications, they'll be considering how projects help the CoC advance these priorities. So increasing affordable housing supply and units, improving the performance of the continuum of care. So that's with regards to shortening length of times that people experience homelessness, moving people quickly into housing, reducing people returning from housing to homelessness, etc. The implementation of evidence-based practices, specifically housing first. Housing first is not housing only. It's housing plus the support services people need to maintain their housing. There is a lot of information. There are links on the new project application and on our website to information about what makes a program housing first. So please, if you're not familiar with the model, if you're applying for funds for the first time, please make sure that you use those resources so that you can think about how you're designing your project to align with that model. Incorporating people with lived experience is important to Housing Alliance, to the continuum of care, and to HUD. So thinking about how people with lived experience inform the program design, are employed by your organization and paid for their expertise and the experience they bring to the table, are serving as members of your board and providing ongoing feedback and input into to your programming. Advancing racial justice and equity and disability rights are the last two. So those are things that are also important to the CoC, things for you to be aware of. So let's talk about how you submit. Required submission materials. This is a list. All of these things can be found on the HAD website, which I'm going to open up and just show a screen. Hopefully you've all been to that page already. That's where you find all of these things that are listed here. But you're going to fill out a new project application. You're going to fill out a cover sheet that provides the basic information about the project that you'd like to implement. The cover sheet is a one-pager, shouldn't be too daunting. And the threshold criteria checklist you need to fill out and submit as well. And that's really for you and for us in the funding committee when we're reviewing your project applications to make sure that all of the basic criteria is met to allow your project to even be considered. If applicable, you're going to also submit your most recent agency audit or single audit, evidence that you have a SAM or UEI registration with the federal government, which is what allows you to receive and implement federal funds. Proof of applicant eligibility. So if you are a 501c3 nonprofit, you would be submitting your proof of your 501c3 status. Local governments are also able to apply for funds. I have to tell you, it hasn't happened in a really long time. I don't know what counts as evidence that you're a local government, other than we know that it's true that you're a local government. If you represent if you're a local government and planning to apply, let me know. I'm not sure what what counts as evidence that you're a local government. You might know. I know for a 501c3, it's that IRS letter. You're going to need a letter indicating that you're able to provide 25% matching funds to the project. And that's just that's a letter from the CEO, from the director, from whoever, the person with the authority to say that. We will be providing 25% cash match using other grants that we receive or using donations that we receive. So you're gonna provide that match letter. And then there's also a budget workbook that has been designed specifically to help you think through, understand what you're applying to do and what the eligible costs are under your CoC grant. So just like every type of grant, you can apply for the grant, and there are certain costs that you can spend money on, and then there are going to be certain costs that aren't eligible. So I'm going to pull up the budget workbook as well, briefly from the HUD website, if you haven't looked at it yet. But that's where you're going to work through what do you need to implement this project? How much money do you need, and how are you planning on spending the funds on your eligible costs? And then for some folks, you're going to need to also submit a letter of support from a partner organization. So if you're new to working with people or families experiencing homelessness, you've never implemented a project that serves the population that you're seeking to serve. Let's say you've been working with people experiencing homelessness, but you want to apply to serve people fleeing and attempting to flee domestic violence only, but you've never served that population specifically. You're going to need to get a letter of support from a partner organization in the community, indicating that they, have worked with you before generally, and believe that you have what it takes to do that work for that population. If you are a renewal project applying for a new project, expansion funds, you're going to submit past performance documentation. And if you are applying for a project and wanting those bonus points related to partnering with a healthcare organization to help fund the project, or leveraging other resources that will pay for the housing part, some portion of the housing costs, so the rental assistance, the subsidy, you're going to need some supporting documentation to show that you have that or will have that lined up. New projects are evaluated by the funding committee. There is a point structure in place. This can all be found in the project application and the scoring rubric that's on our website. I don't intend to go through this in detail unless I have folks here who would like me to, and I'd be happy to talk about it. So feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself if you'd like me to talk through some of this. Okay. So you're going to talk about how you as an applicant have the experience and the capacity. You're going to explain the project that you want to implement or the expansion that you want to implement. You're going to explain why this project's needed, how much it's going to cost, and how you're going to do some of the really important stuff that CoC projects need to do, like implement a housing first low barrier program, ensure that folks have access to appropriate housing case management services, help link folks to resources like income and benefits, etc. Oh, Shy, I'm sorry. I didn't see your chat. You did say, can you briefly talk through them? That was super brief. I was doing like a super brief. Do you want me to talk about it more? I just saw your chat. Is Shy still here? I can't see Shy. I can't see everybody the way I have my screen.
No, she said it was okay. What you went through, how you went through it was okay.
Okay, that was very brief.
And then also Terry had a question, will we get a copy and breakdown of our score?
Yes, so all new project applicants will get feedback related to their submission.
And then I'm sorry, Jacqueline would like some expansion on rescue linkages.
Resource linkages.
I mean, it's resource.
Oh,
yes.
good. Okay. I was like, was that my typo? Yeah, resource linkages. Let me get there. But that's really, HUD wants to see, we want to see, the CoC wants to see that folks experiencing homelessness are connected to mainstream community-based social service resources. So things like Medicaid, if they're eligible, things like SNAP and TANF benefits, things like employment assistance or vocational assistance, vocational training. So that's really what that is primarily about, linkage to things like health insurance, mainstream benefits, and community-based resources, just like all other folks in the community. It has not traditionally been rare for a lot of homeless assistance organizations to try to do it all. So this is really about, you don't have to do it all. Make sure folks are getting access to the benefits and the community-based resources that can help them. Important considerations, the use of CMIS is required. So that's our homeless management information system. Anyone who receives assistance through a continuum of care funded project, their information has to go into CMIS. So if you are not currently a CMIS user, you will need, and you are funded with CoC funds, you'll need to have a user at your organization who's trained to enter data into the system and use the system. And all of the information about how your project performs, what outcomes you're getting for people that HUD and the CoC care about, are all captured in that system. So the use of that system, it's not as simple as just putting in case notes every once in a while. It's a really important component that is used to evaluate the performance of projects, and for us to capture what we need to capture for federal reporting around homelessness and the need in the community. We've talked about housing first. I'm happy to answer any questions folks have about that, but that's a very important one, both to the CoC and to HUD. Participation in centralized intake is required. What that means at this time, the way that our centralized intake, okay, back up. Coordinated entry, we call it in Delaware centralized intake. At the federal level, HUD calls it coordinated entry. People all over the country call it different things. We call it centralized intake. What that means is that if you are if you're planning to do a new permanent supportive housing project, for example, and you want to open five units, I'm saying something very small. You can do 500. That'd be great. Anyone want to do that? But 5 units of permanent supportive housing. All 5 of those units can only be filled with people who are referred to those units, referred to your program through centralized intake. Same with rapid rehousing, same with any project that you're implementing. Any applicant can request up to, but no more than 10% in admin costs. And we've already talked a bit about match. If you're coming in, if you're looking at the eligible costs in your budget worksheet, you're coming in for new project funding, 25% match is required. You'll find it in the budget workbook so that you have to put it in there. If you are applying for leasing funds, that's where the 25% match is not required on those funds, but it is required on any other funds in the grant. So briefly, the timeline, new project apps are due August 9th by 4 p.m. By September, your organization will be notified if your new project, your expansion project, is selected to be submitted to HUD to be considered for funding. Excuse me. So there are 2 levels of review. At the local level, the funding committee is reviewing new projects, selecting which projects to submit to HUD for funding. And then what HUD will do in the spring of next year, they'll look at all these national applications from all over the country. And then the spring of next year, they will tell us which ones are funded. So you may be approved and awarded at the local level, and it may turn out that come spring of next year, the project isn't funded. Often, not always. So it all depends on how, so you might recall, a little over an hour ago, Christy was talking about how projects get ranked. A lot of how a project may or may not get funded by HUD has to do with not only the quality of the project application and that it meets basic HUD requirements, but also how the continuum of care prioritizes, or in other words, ranks the project in the listing that is sent to HUD. Projects at the bottom part of the listing are less likely to get funded than projects at the top part of the listing. It's a really basic rank order. And so the Continuum of Care Funding Committee has to make really hard decisions about doing that, because in an ideal world, we would rank all of them number one. We want HUD to give us as much money as they possibly can to help us solve homelessness. Unfortunately, that's not the process we're allowed to use. We have to rank projects in rank order. But if you are selected locally to be submitted to HUD to be considered for funding, you will be informed by us in September. And that's where you'll do that process Christy was talking about submitting an online application to HUD. The application will be submitted to HUD through us. So you'll register in this thing called eSnaps, this online electronic system for submitting your application. You'll complete the application. You should know that the application that is online, a lot of what we've included in the local project application is in there. So a lot of what you'll be able to do is copy and paste from your project application, in a lot of cases, into the online application, right? We've tried to make that easy for folks and have those things align as much as possible. And that's where you'll need to probably be turning that around fairly quickly, within a couple weeks, in order to get it to HUD. So if you're considering applying for a new project and you want to talk through what that will entail to make sure that you're able to do that, please reach out, please let me know. Things to remember: the goal is to end homelessness for people and families. That means helping people move out of homelessness and into housing as quickly as possible, and providing wraparound supports that they need to remain housed. When you're going through your project application, when you're thinking about your project design and implementation, I want you to ask for the funding that you need, but tell us what you can live with. It's going to ask you for your project budget. A lot of what we've seen over the years anyway is nonprofits come in asking for not nearly what they need because they're used to existing in an environment of scarcity. The CoC HUD funding application is no different. It is an environment of scarcity. But what we also know is that if projects aren't properly resourced, they're less likely to be successful for the people who are served. So we want to know what you really need to do what it is you're trying to do and do it successfully. And you might not get that. So one thing that we do ask in the project application is, if that's not able to be funded, but the committee wants to fund this project, what's the minimum amount that it would require, and what would that do in terms of your ability to serve people? So maybe you'd say, well, if I'm requesting a grant of $350,000, that will allow me to serve, I'm making this up, I'm not thinking about the cost ratio right now, but that'll give me the ability to serve 25 households in this rapid rehousing project each year. I could go down to 150,000, but that would make it so that I could only serve 7 households instead of 25, right? We want to know that so that we can think about how to scale your funding award if the committee wants to select your project for funding. But don't be afraid to ask for what you need. Obviously, projects that are leveraging, for the bonus points, projects that are leveraging healthcare resources or other housing resources to fund portions of their project are going to be more competitive. But please make sure that you're asking for the appropriate amount of money for staff and for case management and paying people appropriate wages, right? You should have at least one, I forget what it is in the application. But I think it's 1 to 30 or 1 to 25 case manager ratio. So ask for what you need, make sure that services would be appropriately provided. If you need any help, contact Erin or I, and this is just a repeat of the how to apply slide. I am going to share with you. Are you all seeing the website now? Okay. So if you haven't come here yet, hurry up and go there. This is the CoC funding webpage on the Housing Alliance site. And that's where this is what it looks like at the top. The request for proposals outlines all of what I have shared and more. So if you're applying, please read the RFP in detail. Right here. To make sure you're eligible to apply and you understand what these funds can be used for. Please reach out if you would like a technical assistance meeting or want to talk about your project idea in more detail. All of the materials you need are here. So the new project application, the cover sheet, the criteria checklist, the budget workbook, and this you don't need to fill out. This is the project scoring rubric. It's just to show you how the funding committee is going to be evaluating the projects that are submitted. So you can see the different scoring mechanisms. And this is the list of all of the things. Again, I shared it with you already in the PowerPoint, but all of the things that need to be submitted for your submission to be considered complete. Now I am going to pull up, just so that you see it, the new project budget workbook. Yep, it's just going to take a minute.
While we are waiting for that to load, Carrie had a question in the chat. If the 600,000 in DV was the entire pot for new projects, and that is the amount that's available off the bat for CoC bonus for new projects. That is not including any reallocation decisions or funds made available through that. And those conversations and decisions haven't been made or had yet. So as of right now, that is in general the amount of money that's available for new projects.
So and just to, so if you were thinking about I could do, like, if I could do something with those $600,000 that would be really competitive, that would make a real impact on homelessness in our state, that would be eligible for HUD CoC funds, don't be afraid to apply for $600,000. Again, you're going to want to indicate what would change if you only got 300 or what would change if you only got 200, but there isn't a final dollar amount that we know is available for new projects at this point because of the potential for reallocation of existing funds in the future. So this is the project budget form. You need to fill this out and submit it. Christy is the genius behind this form. And there are certain things that won't, if you don't fill it out correctly, if you don't fill out everything as you go, it's like one of those magic Excel documents that I don't know how to create, where if you don't fill something out over here, it doesn't pop up over here. So make sure you're really going through, paying attention, filling it out, picking from the lists, you know, what's here to be filled out. And it's really going to go through and tell you what type of costs are eligible. There's an instruction page here. These links, I will tell you, are critical, right? So the interim rule. If you have any questions at all about, like, what does leasing costs mean? What does rental assistance costs actually mean? What's eligible under services? What does it mean? The CoC program interim rule is where you want to be. That's the detail that HUD provides on eligible costs in the CoC program. I think I'm going to stop. I think that's it for me, but I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have. Does anyone who is thinking about applying for newly applying for funds know right now off the bat, based on what you heard today, that you want to schedule one-on-one time to meet before submitting? Tony says yes. Okay. Cool. Okay. Erin, we're saving that, right? The chat.
We will send out a Calendly scheduling link or doodle with available times for those. So we'll make sure that everybody who is on the meeting today is on the list that gets that follow-up.
Perfect. It's like, I'm not going to remember those yeses. Questions? Concerns? I'm very comfortable with silence. I can wait a really long time. I had a professor who would do that. She would just wait. Okay, well,
It is a
please,
long process, Terry says in the chat. Yes,
yes.
year long.
Well, we will definitely be following up with that scheduling Calendly link to get you a one-on-one meeting with a CoC staff member or myself to talk through questions you have about your specific project. If you have any quick questions that don't require one-on-one, please feel free to email us and to reach out. Again, primarily to myself and to Erin for answers to your questions. Well, you all made that really easy on us. Thank you so much. Oh, Carrie.
Well, just real quick. So the PowerPoint's going to be on the website. Okay, thank you.
And sent out to everyone, right, Erin? Email. Yep. Okay. Well, thank you all so much. I hope to hear from you soon. I know I'll hear from many of you soon. Have a great afternoon.